Right. Okay. Um, uh, Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first in the series of the in detail talks, looking at some of the kind of amazing projects that won the RIAS 2024 kind of awards this year. I had an incredible privilege of chairing the jury and visiting kind of 17 amazing projects, of which kind of 11 won awards. And a number went on to win special awards, of which one of them today, the Northgate Social Housing Project in Glasgow, by Page and Park, was one of. So we're really pleased today to have James Brimble from Page and Park, who was the project architect for the scheme, and also Lorne MacDougall, who is the area specification manager for Equitone UK, who was sponsoring the award, who's also here on the talk today as well. So we're really looking forward to James's talk, but very briefly, just before that, Lorne is going to talk perhaps a little bit briefly about Equitone UK. Lorne, can I hand over to you?
Hi, Nick. Yep, thanks for the introduction. So we're asked by Joe there, kind of a little introduction to Equitone and also why we were sponsoring the award. And really, it's just RIAS, I would say, champion the built environment in Scotland. It's an area where Equitone are aiming. We're not there. I'm sure there's a number of folk on the call that haven't heard of us, but it's an area we're aiming to be a leader in. And when RIAS can put on display the passion for architecture that exists in Scotland and highlight such a wide range of projects, large and small, with a great array of practices and architects and different styles celebrated, it's something we really want to get involved in. It's a fantastic event that was put on in Edinburgh there for the prize giving, and obviously great to support the award for James there in Northgate. So just run through a very brief introduction to Equitone and then pass over. Hopefully this is working here. So Equitone, like RIAS, have a strong focus on sustainable architecture, sustainable design. And for those who are not aware of what Equitone is, it's a lightweight fibre cement facade material, lightweight cladding. There's a wide range of colours and textures, which is always important. Those that do know Equitone will know grey. We do a lot of it in all different panels. All the panels are fire rated A2S1D0, suitable to any height, and they can be cut into any size or shape, perforated and routed. So you can see in the right there's a social housing block in Blackpool with our linear product, cut just to give something a bit different. The other one's a distillery entrance over in Lochranza, Butte, where they've routed in the image for the distillery. All the materials have EPDs, they've got MSDs, and we've got cradle-to-cradle certification as well. A really wide-ranging, holistic certification for not just the material, but the business as well, going through the kind of 5 points highlighted there. It can be secret fixed, 8 or 12 mil, and we offer a range of different services. Small samples through to full mock-ups, assistance with specification in the MBS, CAD detailing and BIM objects, and optimization for panel and subframe, which I'll touch on very briefly. So one of the main points, which I've not hit, sorry, is the light impact. So low maintenance and durable. 100% of the energy used is renewable, 40% coming from our own solar. And light impact logistics. So 85% of the raw materials for our Belgian boards are delivered over water, and 65% of those are from less than 150 kilometres from the factory. Everyone talks about recycling. We're looking at recycling, of course, but also disassembly. Can a product be on the wall for 10, 20 years, be taken off and be reused? Equitone, as it turns out, can. We've got a large-scale project there in the Netherlands. I think it was 15 or 20,000 metres, taken off, graded and reused. And not possible, obviously, without serious collaboration with all stakeholders. So whether we're helping with panel layouts, panel designs, where your subframe, your clasps, hooks are going, If we're involved, the earlier the better. It's a recent example, taking the wastage of a project down from the panel aspect from 16 to 8% and maintaining the desired aesthetic. It's just showing some of the options there and the substructure optimization. And that's just a very brief and simplistic look at the embodied carbon of Equitone against some other well-known materials. So relatively low there. And that is all from me. I'll pass back to Nick to pass over to James.
Lovely, thank you, Lorne. That was really good. So I'm really pleased to introduce James Brimble, project architect from Page and Park of the Northgate Social Housing Scheme. The jury, when we visited the scheme, were really impressed. Well, both by James's presentation of it, but also the building itself, in terms of how the quality of accommodation of the homes had been kind of really skillfully kind of shoehorned into quite a tight urban site, and how it made really positive frontages to almost every single aspect. And we were, I think, slightly bowled over by the really kind of the really sensible approach to common parts, but also the kind of the narratives and the tales that we were told by the residents that were living there and how much they enjoyed being part of that this new housing development. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to James to talk about the scheme.
Thanks a lot, Nick, and Lorne, thank you for that presentation. It's an absolute honour to be presenting this, and as I say, there will be questions at the end, and I'll be happy to take. What I wanted to do is just run through, firstly, the history of Northgate and how we got there, and also just, I think, the impact on the people who now live in there. And I think that's something that I've been really quite proud of through that process. So Northgate Social Housing, as I say, I'm a senior architect at Page and Park. I actually joined in 2017, Page Park, as a part 2, graduated in 2019, did my part 3. And so Northgate is actually officially my second building I've completed, both of which have been in the Gables. The first one I completed on site was the New Gables Housing Association headquarters, which is actually on the same street, which is kind of quite unique. But as I say, it's been a fantastic client of ours, and there's been a long-running commitment, I think, from the client to just producing brilliant social housing, in particular within the Gables. It really has been transformational. I hope this presentation will really kind of shine a light on that process. One of the things that I think is really quite vital about the Gables is fundamentally how much a part of Glasgow it really is. So High Street being one of the oldest streets in the city that runs up between the cathedral all the way down, actually lines up with where Northgate's site aligns. And so one thing that has always been very important is, well, how do we connect the city back to the north and south? And it's a similar problem that I think London has had and other cities. The river does become a bit of a segregating line. So, as I say, the client here was all about how do we reconnect and make sure that the Gables very much is part of the city story of Glasgow. And of course, under rapid economic growth, those of you who know Glasgow well, it really did grow, and so did the south side, including the Gables, becoming one of the densest parts of the whole of Scotland in terms of the amount of heavy industry and so forth that was coming in terms of work. Of course, that led to a lot of social problems, and most of which I think have been slowly erased and removed and made better. And I think there's been certainly a few attempts in the past in the Gables that I'll go into in terms of making sure that we develop and make it as sustainable as possible so that these communities can really thrive. And certainly at the time, there were some real problems in the post-war period. And obviously that was a big reason why at the time the old was seen as part of the problem rather than part of the solution. And obviously a lot of Glasgow, but in particular this part of Glasgow, was wiped away, wiped clean. And this is a really great diagram actually from architect CZWG, who did the Gables master plan, showing quite how transformational it was from going from the period in 1900 with the strong perimeter tenemental blocks, as you see there, down to these point blocks of a very kind of fragmented open space around them. It was very futuristic and bold, but obviously there were problems with it as well. So as part of that, of course, some of the buildings were infamous in many ways, but Queen Elizabeth Square there as being one of the prime examples of a building that was very forward thinking, but obviously came with issues. And that was demolished in 1993. So again, demolition of the old. It wasn't really that old. And so one of the things that I believe as architects we've had to learn from is how do we create resilient communities where we're not having to do this cycle, because again, it's not great for the community or not great for the built environment and for the carbon emissions that are a part of that. And one of the things that I've been quite proud of when I joined Page & Park was just quite, and there are plenty of practices in Glasgow and wider UK as well, that just have a commitment to putting the time and effort into developing our cities again to make them really livable, beautiful places to live. And this is actually the same position of Gauble Street taken at two different times, just showing the power of the transformation that has happened within Glasgow. Obviously, there is a ways to go, but what is really quite reassuring is just quite, seeing how much has changed in that period. So before I was born, there was the CZWG master plan, and that was all about the new Gaubles. And of course, part of that was bringing back the tenemental typology with a little bit more variation in the architecture. So it was still experimental, but it was going back to a tried and tested method that people in Glasgow are very familiar with within the tenemental streets that were created. The first phase of that was completed in the year 2000. You can see there the diagram to the right shows a number of key markers, which were highlighted as these crosses, these stars, and one of which would be the Northgate site, which is sitting up to the north there. And that there really is quite significant in the sense that it's one of the key buildings that's sandwiched between the master plan that faces directly up the street up to High Street and then into the city centre of Glasgow. At the time, CZWG actually did a planning application and got approval for a 14-storey building for the site. But at the time as well, there were concerns of gentrification, and looking at some analysis from Florian Urban, who's a historian at GSA, actually having a look and seeing that at the time, this tower was to be 20% former Gaubles residents. And there was a concern that it was really gentrification and pushing in a more middle-class clientele, especially considering the location relative to the city centre, and the views are quite phenomenal. And thankfully, we haven't gone down that road. And what we've actually brought is a building with 100% Gaubles residents being maintained and kept locally. So that's the site there. It's fundamentally faces towards the city, hence the kind of Northgate name. It is very much a gateway into Crown Street as well, which is one of the main thoroughfares of the Gaubles. And the Gaubles, for those of you know or don't know, essentially it's a relatively dense part of inner city Glasgow. It's outside the city centre to the south of the Clyde, but it's very, very well connected to Glasgow Green. There's a swimming pool gym nearby, and of course the Gaubles Rose Garden, Gaubles Park, and Crown Street itself becoming a very significant shopping street within the area. So the average 10-minute walk there gives you a good kind of 20-minute neighbourhood spread, showing that a lot of this stuff is on your doorstep. This was the site as we came to it when we first started looking at the site. Of course, it was pretty uninspiring. There was this blank gable left over from this previous office library development, and the Gushett site itself narrows down to a point, so it was quite an awkward site, probably the reason why it has been left for so long. But it was crying out for something to really create a statement on what is a very large, wide road as well. So we were having to contend a lot with the scale of the infrastructure to create something of note. One of the key elements here is that not only is it aligning with High Street, but also it aligns with the Tolbooth Steeple, which is a fantastic heritage asset of Glasgow. And in addition, the number of towers that sit just above the skyline. So we always imagine this to sit just above the skyline and really saw it as a kind of a series of these towers and a modern addition to the skyline within the area. And then the ordnance survey you can see there shows the relative small scale of the site relative to the site itself, which is taken up by a kind of free church. There's a library and office as well in the corner, and then a significant amount of parking as well, all of which is outside of the site boundary that we had. So the site that we were given was the small triangle of green in that location. So it's very, very tight. At the time, just stylistically, I was really interested, and still am, fragmented roofscapes. I find them quite fascinating, and I was really into the kind of Italian hilltop, kind of medieval streets within the UK as well, how that really starts to create a character. And interestingly, the merchant city of Glasgow has a lot more of that, because it is part of the older part of the city relative to the newer stuff that was produced later on. And so we had some fun in terms of developing a style, a gateway building of merit. And a lot of that was about ensuring that all of the units had dual aspect, having to stagger the units to ensure that happened, but also in terms of creating a dense and efficient layout with 5 units off a single core. So it was all about creating and maximizing the site for the client, but also creating something of note on that location. So I'll just run through some of the final model images. These were done for planning, showing our proposal. It's quite a neat butterfly roof. The idea is that these towers all splay out, and in doing so, it opens itself out as wide as possible to create a welcoming face to the Gables. And this is another example here, just showing how exposed the building is on multiple sides. So we never liked the idea of there being a formal back or rear where, you often get gunk and stuff added. We wanted to make every single elevation sing as a front elevation, and really play around with that. And that's really come out through the detail. The ground floor plan here introduces us to the curved entranceway, which is quite a key feature. It's a very, very wide open corridor. Fundamentally, the corridor is around 2 meters wide to assist with the people getting in and out in terms of wheelchairs and bikes and so forth. And so there was a huge emphasis there of creating something of openness and spaciousness within the ground floor plane. And then just showing how that's segregated. There is only 1 unit on the ground floor. Everything else is given over to the ancillary and the common space, which includes a common kitchen, rise and fall worktop for wheelchair users within their common facility. There's a games room, disabled toilet, and unisex WC, a little office there for the living well person who organizes a lot of these events. Obviously, we have the refuse store. The bike store is in there in terms of resilience. That's a space per unit. And in addition, there's a wheelchair store and laundry at the front there. And of course, everything else is given over to circulation. The site was very constrained, but we were able to squeeze into WC specific parking spaces, which have access from the main parking there, and they kind of sit within the undercroft of the building on that wing. And then the floor, our typical floor plan above, is set up with 5 units off a single core, and they're segregated like that. And the building splays out fundamentally at the front, but then going back, the building goes towards a much more formalized rectilinear building, so that there's efficiencies where we need it, but where we wanted to create a statement and ensure that there was dual aspect, there was an opportunity to open the building up, and as you can see, the building splays out in order to achieve that. So the way the drawing set up, the front and the north really was the gateway, and so that's where most of the views are as well, going back to the city. And so that's where we have a series of balconies and Juliet balconies. The building here was very important that we had lots of light coming in. Obviously, Glasgow can have various grey days, and so the idea is to kind of maximize light at the same time as maximizing as much ventilation as we possibly could, ensuring that all living rooms were also dual aspect as well, just so that, if you're sat in a living room, you get fantastic views over the city, which really are quite phenomenal. The east elevation actually steps up and creates is split within 2, but there is a key axis which lines up with the part that steps forward, and then the building shifts back to the right there, where it gets taller to avoid essentially overshadowing the building adjacent. And you can see that the curtain walling to the ground floor screen is very open and wide. That was really to create a welcoming entrance akin to a shop front, which then adjoins to Crown Street. The rear elevation, which is the south, is actually partly covered up by the adjacent building, so we were limited, but we do have a series of windows that get glimpse views out to the corners and also ensure that the building is active. We also were able to step the building brickwork at the rear to create a little bit of form and development and just kind of molding it so that it didn't feel like just a blank facade, and we felt like that was very important for us to do. And then the west elevation really does open up, and you can see how, as it was all modeled in 3D, we're able to splay the building so that essentially, if you looked at it in pure elevation, it does look like a pure cut. But because you're looking at it always in perspective, you get this kind of pineappled, fragmented appeal to it, which I think is quite pleasing to the eye, especially as the light changes throughout the day. The detail of that, really, it's a steel frame building, lots of insulation, there's concrete composite floors, and all the services are concealed within a service zone. And it's a brick building, as you can see, that fundamentally it's quite simple. We have Juliet balconies throughout, powder coated Juliets. In addition, a lot of the brickwork has been maintained internally, including tiling. So the idea was to create a robust aesthetic that was very simple and bright, which is also quite resilient to, you know, people move in and move furniture, that they're not going to get bashed up. So the client was willing to invest in that, and I think that's a real testament to their commitment there. So the way the building turned out was really about this gateway, and as I say, anyone who walks past this building, it changes throughout the day with different weather as the sun goes over the top, which I think is part of the appeal of it. But that's really the fundamental north elevation from the city centre. And then that's an example there of showing, just as the light comes round, how it starts to catch all these facades and really be quite dynamic. Our photographer did some great shots, and we had a fantastic day, thankfully, to get the shots. That's another example there showing how the building splays up, and also showing how the balconies are inset within the form of the building to allow that to happen. And that's another detailed shot there of the some of the areas where we actually had to reduce costs. We did have full brick soffits within these areas, and we ended up putting in a external grade soffit system, which I think was quite neat and tidy, and yeah, obviously reflects light back into the rooms as well. As I was saying before, with the east elevation, you can see how the building steps back. So formally, you have a proportion that doesn't feel quite as wide as it would if it was one continuous elevation. And it just also allows the shadow to drop across the building, which I think is quite appealing. And the views at the top are quite something, just because of how close you are to the city centre. And I know the residents are very happy with those views. The windows are quite wide, significant, allowing that to happen. And of course, the detail here is fundamentally brick, but it was also about a chunky fundamental brick rather than it being paper thin. We wanted to create chunky reveals. So we have a mix of brick and half and full brick reveals throughout, in addition to all the Juliets. It's a very simple detail. It's just being developed and placed around the building. So there's a level of consistency. In addition, we were quite happy with the railing detail that we wanted to keep consistent all the way through. Again, just to kind of add a little bit of detail and pattern, that we were quite happy with that, the output there. You can see the entrance has this big curved entranceway with a seat. The idea is there that someone could come and sit and wait for a taxi without getting wet. And you can just see the amount of light and aspect that has onto the street as well, creates a real strong connection with that. And just making sure the key views are lining up. So at no point are you segregated in, or it's a really dark corridor. The idea is to kind of create something of wide merit, something that's easily accessible for the residents who have taken or made this their home. The building itself has multiple different unit types. There's 9 in total, but the top floor maisonette flat in particular was developed really because we needed essentially an 8th story. In this case, it's a mezzanine, to create the height on that tower, hence having the particular mezzanine zone within that area. And I know the tenant of this particular flat is very, very happy with the views. They are quite something. You can see there the consistency of the brickwork inside, the tiling throughout as well. It's creating a robust, but also very simple palette of materials. I think is also complemented by the Nordan windows, and the natural timber that they produced on the inside just helped bring a bit of warmth to the kind of whitewashed walls as the building was handed over. Of course, it's changed now, and I know the judges were commenting quite how personal, and I've always been quite taken by how personal all these flats have been made from all of the tenants when we've gone in to see them. But at the time, of course, they were just whitewashed walls, so they were a little bit more simple in that regard. The other thing that's really important is there wasn't like the best flat and then all the other flats are rubbish. It was fundamental here that all of the flats had aspects and strong views, and the light was tested on all of these as well. So we're very happy that we're able to keep a consistency throughout all of the units. And then there's the common space as well. So again, big part of this scheme was to give over a lot of space to the tenants. There's 31 flats in all, with around, I think it's 160 square meter common area with kind of seating. It's a managed kind of area where there's a TV space. There's again the kitchen, games room, and so forth. It's very similar detail to the kind of the windows are obviously consistent from the flats above. So there's consistency there, but these spaces are opened out and much wider, allowing the social spaces to take place. And we did a nice post-occupancy here, and that's just, you know, showing some of the residents there talking to some of the Page Park colleagues within the space. We worked quite hard to get a nice series of furniture and specify all of the RAL colours and materials there to make quite a soft, subtle interior palette, something that was very kind of easy on the eye, but also had all of the contrasting values that you needed. But it was lovely to meet all of the tenants and talk through some of this stuff, all of which again are Gorbals locals, which again we've been very, very proud of in this scheme to keep and maintain. They were very proud of this. They produced this in the common area. It's a kind of light that they produced, and there's a little shelving area going back that we've produced to allow that to be shown in its greatest glory. And yeah, just fundamentally, one of the things that I've been most proud of is just how taken the tenants have been and how happy they are to have the spaces they have. And I think again, it's a testament to a really, really good client, very, very committed to the ongoing development of the Gorbals. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, James. Unfortunately, on Zoom, we can't sit there and do kind of collective clapping, which we can hear. But thank you very much for talking kind of through that. But also, I think specifically the kind of some of the history of that part of Glasgow and the kind of the wider, I suppose, kind of social context of where you're building. I mean, I suppose. So just to say to everybody, the Q&A is open. There's a Q&A tab at the bottom of the Zoom call. So please click on the tab and put your question in, and I will try and field those and raise those with James. But I suppose before I do that, as a first question about the wider context of, you know, building social housing in Scotland today. I mean, on one level, the question might be, well, you know, what are the challenges, and you know, in terms of the quality of both of space, of material, and you know, what's stopping every project kind of being of this quality, and what do you think it is that was about your particular kind of constellation of either consultants or teams or clients or stakeholders that enabled this project to take off?
I think partly it was the buy-in from everybody, including the contractor, that this site needed to be something really special. And because this is one of the last remaining, or was one of the last remaining sites that New Gorbals had within its possession, they were very keen that it was something of note. And in fact, that was, I mean, the briefing we had was really to talk through the requirement for space to maximize the site, to do something that was of merit and something that really did connect with the city itself. And because it's the first building you now see going into the Gorbals from the city centre, it needed to be good. And so I think that that was partly due to that we had the buy-in then from the contractor, who knew at the very start this is what we needed to achieve. The contractor CCG, who are Glasgow based, they do lots of housing throughout the city, obviously very mixed in very different styles and with different architects. I think with this one, it's very interesting because it's the same contractor and the site agent who I dealt with, worked very closely with on the New Gauls office, and of course it was the same client. So I think, like with anything, it's creating these really good relationships where there is a buy-in, there's compromise, but at the end of the day, you know, there were issues that came up on site, as there always are. On a lot of D&Bs, you can imagine maybe being ignored as an architect, or not necessarily ignored, but you know, time's at the essence. But I think here, because there was the buy-in and the commitment, and everything was very much an open conversation, I think that really helped, because you know, without that, I think it perhaps would have been a bit more rushed, and there would have been details that we had designed, but perhaps the contractor wouldn't have been able to get to. And you know, at the end of the day, clients are desperate as well for housing. There is a long waiting list for housing for the New Gauls as well. So I think that's part of what made it quite special.
And that nicely brings on to the first question, which has been raised with a Q&A. Somebody in the Zoom, it has anonymous attendee, so I can't attribute it to anybody.
Okay.
But a listener says, so high quality materials seem to be used throughout, with Nordonac alley clad windows and high quality brick. Could you chat a little bit more about the construction cost per square meter or cost per flat, and perhaps talk about some of those challenges that you had?
Yep. So at the time, the city of Glasgow had what was called the Glasgow Standard, which is going through its own changes, and partly it's based on multiple existing housing standards, including housing for varying needs. But it was like that plus, and so that set out quite a lot of the standards that it needed to achieve, which it did in all regards, and that was part of the way in which half the money, I think, came from the council. As far as I'm aware, I believe what happens when you Gaubles, as with a lot of housing, community based housing, is that they get a cash injection from the government, but obviously then the council are able to influence the design, hence the Glasgow Standard. I know that London has its own London Standard, and it's a similar thing. So, but obviously that doesn't talk anything about materials or costs. That's purely just you know, the standards in terms of space, what we're able to achieve. We worked very closely with the contractor very early on to find materials that they were working with to ensure that they were happy with using them. I think in a way as well, we were really clear that we wanted to create something that was very simple, even though they are nice materials, but you find a detail that works, and then you just present it on every part. It's a little bit different to a lot of postmodern buildings in Glasgow and in Gaubles in particular. There's some of which Page Park have done in the past, where there's lots of materials. And I think where architecture is now, everything is much more simple. It doesn't mean it can be boring. And I think that's why the building shape and the form and just the simplistic nature of the fact that they're all Juliet balconies. And what we actually ended up doing, and just in terms of VE is an interesting point, there was a point where we had more smaller windows, and we actually ended up taking those windows out and making some of the windows bigger. So we actually had less windows, but the glazing ratio was more, and we still made a saving. So the cost per unit at this point in time was actually quite high, and we're able to find savings through just reducing the number and increasing the amount of glazing, because of course that's also a planning issue and something that we were very keen on, to create a very wide and open aspect from all of these views. The brick itself was very cost effective. It is a concrete brick. Marshalls have actually brought it up now, but it's an Eden Hall brick that has been used in Glasgow for a number of years now. It has half the amount of carbon of a clay brick as part of the reason why we were looking at it, but also just the honeycomb color of it works really well for us. And that obviously enabled us to have that brick inside as well, because that was fundamental to the resilience of the building, that the client wanted to ensure that building would look good for the longest period of time, hence ensuring that there were hard, solid materials on the inside. And then it was just designing out what were considered particularly expensive details. Like we had a few more brick soffits, which were, often are the first things to go, but we were able to keep some and change others. And, and again, I think that comes down to the fact that the contractor would get, there was a negotiated tender, but there was a discussion, a debate around a lot of this stuff that it came in. So there was a really strong beneficial output at the end of the day that ensured that everybody made money, but it's just creating fantastic housing was fundamental to the client's brief, and I think that really shows.
Yeah, absolutely. And are you able to share kind of cost per?
Yeah, absolutely. So the cost per square meter is £1,739. That's fees included. I know, just on an example, we did a kind of timber one with the same brick, at Kilsyth Road. It's another project that colleagues worked on, and I think that was coming in at like 1,400, but that wasn't steel frame, of course, that was timber, and it was lower level, and it wasn't in the city of Glasgow. So I think we got a pretty good cost per square meter for that, considering the fact that it's a city centre location and so forth. And there were challenges in terms of site access, just how busy the place was. But yeah, it was £1,739 was the cost per square meter.
I mean, that's incredibly impressive as a cost per square meter. I suppose talking perhaps a little bit more about the kind of the architecture and the kind of the constellation of the form. I think it was really interesting what you were just saying about using a simple material really well, and that idea of a slight kind of economy of means in terms of how that's worked. I mean, the plan I think is quite beguiling, and it's what we were taken with when we went round was, I suppose, both the generosity and the sensitivity of the plan, in terms of its kind of carefulness, and that it's kind of part pinwheel, part orthogonal. And one of the really interesting things we thought is that actually when you're in the common spaces, it feels quite intimate, and it feels actually quite like a small block because of the pinwheel arrangement. You don't have a long thin corridor in terms of it's the common parts are kept very tight. I'm interested in, I suppose, the design process and how many iterations, and whether there were any particular kind of architectural references kind of outside of Glasgow.
Yeah, I think, well, when we first started looking at the site, I think we saw it as a series of towers. That was always going to be the case, and there was always going to be this stepped thing going on to get the dual aspect. You end up having to do that inevitably. Quite how much we ended up stepping it was part of the design process, and that was really just to mold it, and that was to shape it to the site, which was obviously quite bespoke. But it didn't start off as a splayed building, and in fact there was a debate as well. Simon Metcalf, the client for the site, was thinking at one point, he was like, why don't we just do 2 towers? You might be able to get more in. And I was like, well, there's something really nice about 3. Another interesting fact when we were modeling it was, I was setting out all the brick dims, and the 3 heads above the towers are actually 1 brick less each time. And that was part of the process, that it had to kind of be mathematically perfect, that it had to be a middle one, and it had to be in between the 2. I quite enjoyed that, just playing around with brick and experimenting with what that can do. There were some great buildings. I mean, I started my education in architecture in 2010. So at the time, it was Doug and Morris, but Morris & Co. did that fantastic, I think it's Brentford Locks scheme with the great zigzag roof. I've always been a big fan of O'Donnell and Toomey. And I think it's that experimentation of form. And at Page Park, I've got a great repertoire as well of those kind of things coming together. I'm just really interested in of how that works. And I think it was a great opportunity to really push that and create what was, rather than a series of towers that were all relatively disjointed, make it a unified whole. And that's why it was quite fun to get in and start modeling this stuff and sketching it through. The plan itself was really developed to maximize the site in terms of dual aspect and the unit step in order to do that. But then the actual building form itself and how it splays that was really the design process. That's where we went to, was we kind of knew what numbers we could get within the constraints of the building height and the building regs, but the building form and the way it's splayed, that was something that was quite interesting to see develop through both Revit and also modeling in 3D.
Yeah. There's another question which I think follows on perhaps a little bit from that, which is someone talking about noticeably there's no external rainwater goods and drainage. Can you talk through the strategy and the robustness of that?
Yeah, so it's a butterfly roof, which essentially means all of the water goes into the middle, which in a way as well, it's important to hide PV. There's 72 PV panels on the roof. There are a lot of schemes in Glasgow where you have to see them inevitably because, you know, it's usually what happens is you have a single kind of parapet and then it kind of slants down. And so if you're looking at it from the back, you always end up seeing that and you get the big forehead on the front. I think here I was really keen, considering that you could see the building from all around. That's why you kind of do that. So on both sides, so at no point are you looking up going, oh, I can see that stuff. So it was a big generator of the plan, and the roof was to try and hide a lot of that stuff. So just concealing services full stop was, I think, fundamental. I think it can make a real difference between a good building and a great building. I think it's just that level of detail and working through all of that early stage using Revit, using BIM, to clash detect. I mean, a really good example, there were bolts that we had to countersink in because of, you know, avoiding clashes, and I was able to go and work through all of that, all of which wouldn't be possible without 3D software. So that was something that was great learning curve, but also, you know, obviously meant that there were less problems on site, and less problems on site means you're going to get a cleaner building. So it's a kind of step-by-step process that I think worked out in the long run. In terms of the rainwater goods, basically we have the rainwater comes into the center. It's a very large kind of central zone, which is a kind of single ply area with a big kind of internal gutter. And then actually the water runs through the roof space down to the front. And in fact, I could probably get a plan up just to quickly show you.
That'd be great.
If I go back to that one. So it's actually these two, I'm going to zoom in. Oh, I zoom in there. Not sure if you can see. Oh, I'm going to go all the way back. Sorry about that. It's not allowing me to go directly to the drawing I want. That's a good example. Okay, so where we've got these slight chunky bits of wall, we have, that's our rainwater pipes. They do run internally, but they are placed within cupboards. There's rodding points all the way along them. And then what we have are rain gardens. I know I didn't really talk about the SUD strategy, but due to the fact that we have obviously flooding issues in cities because of the amount of hard surface, the current strategy for the city council is to do everything with all surface water, which is the stuff from the roof, deal with that within the ground. So these are big soakaways, which are called rain gardens, which were designed nice and neatly by our engineers, G3. Did a great job of integrating that, and you basically don't notice them there. The rain gardens all sit underneath the garden area, so the pipes just pop out at the bottom there. So it's all concealed. I think it was important, as I said, because there isn't a back, that we didn't just have a place where we had all of the pipes and so forth. There was just nowhere to hide it. So we worked really hard to try and create a strategy that, you know, first enabled stuff to be hidden, but also accessible through the scheme.
Okay. And then, I mean, one of the other things that struck us when we were there is that I think we went in and saw 3 or 4 of the tenants who also kind of talked a great deal about how they love their spaces. And I think, as you talked about in your presentation, they had kind of customized kind of those apartments and those flats in their own kind of way. I mean, how much of that was part of the conversation at design stage, or how much of that was something that kind of you brought into it yourself? Or
I think there's a few things. The tenants were not selected at design stage, but they were selected through the construction, and all the tenants, many of which have come from the recently decanted Caledonia Road towers, which are 2 relatively tall towers, which are earmarked for demolition, which is a new Gawble site. So they're already kind of used to living in the Gawbles, hence kind of moving even closer to the heart of the Gawbles, which I think is part of why they've been so happy coming in, because historically people were moved out of the community, and communities were uprooted, and I think we've learned lessons from that, and I think that's a really strong element of it. I think as well, the tenants, and because of the way New Gables work, the tenants were able to feed back any information on what they want and needs. Things like, if you're definitely in need of a lift or a wheelchair, and I know two of which people who are in Northgate were actually moved from another building to have access to a lift because they're wheelchair users. So New Gables as an organisation look at the tenants and the needs, and they then said, well, this is what we need. And this tower was designed mainly potentially as multi-purpose. Of course, if, for example, in 20, 30, 40 years, they decide to mix it up and put more different people in, because everything is so generous anyway, it serves its purpose. It can be, anyone can go in. But I think because of the wide corridors, the fact that there are, obviously the lifts in there, that there's plenty of space on the ground floor, the common area, these are things that are more specific to the needs of the over 55 cohort that have been put in. But in terms of resilience, there's still a bike store, which I'm not sure how many bikes will be in there at the moment, but probably not as many as it would be in the future. So it's all about resilience and building in stuff, knowing that, we're future proofing here. We don't want to be demolishing and with the Queen Elizabeth Square, the Basil Spence building, just making sure that we don't do that, I think is really, really fundamental.
I love the comment from one of the tenants who said that in where they'd lived before there wasn't a bike store, and now they were so pleased that they had a bike. And it was on one level quite a simple thing, but the way in which accessible servicing has enabled that take place. There's one other question that's come through on the Q&A, which is about kind of time periods and program, and how long did the project take from initial design through to completion?
Sure. It was actually extremely efficient compared to most schemes. It's interestingly the New Gables office, which I completed on site. It was my first building on site, part as a Part 2, part as an architect. I didn't design that planning. That was designed by another architect called Peter Smith, who works at Collective now. It just shows how long these buildings take to get off the ground, because I think that was in the office in Page Park for about 8 or 9 years before it actually got completed. So the way Northgate worked was there was a very quick turnaround. It was as I say, the site itself was earmarked for development, and that was very fundamental. And after the office and the Sandyfield site, which was Elder and Cannon, had been developed, that was the next proposal that they wanted to focus on before moving on to other sites within the Gables. Just in terms of timings, I believe that it was about a year development cycle in terms of getting planning drawings and design together. And then it was about 18 months on site. And part of the reason why it was so swift was that there was a pot of money. This is pre-COVID as well, remember? So there's a slight element of that. But essentially, there was a pot of money that the council had to spend, and that money was available, but it was only available to a certain period of time. And so it was important that the client made use of that money, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was probably about half the project value. Obviously, New Gables would know that statistically, but that's how it would work. And they put in their own money, and the council puts in their own. So the fact that happened so quickly meant that there was a strong, I guess the wheel was turning. There was a strong motivation to get it on site as soon as. And I think planning as well brought into, there were a few challenges in terms of, like, car free at the time was a bit more controversial. It's not so now. It was essentially a car free development, and that we had to make a number of statements about, the fact that New Gables control a lot of the parking in the area, and if people need a car, they'll be given one. We still had to work through all of that. But in terms of the design and the emphasis on the design, that was done very, very swiftly and efficiently, more so than other schemes, because there's more stops and starts, just based on the fact of the wider economy. So the money was there to be spent, and I think that really helped push it forward on that.
it tends to make things go quicker, doesn't it?
A little bit, yeah.
I suppose just as we're nearing the end of this, but I suppose one final question to kind of zoom back out again. I mean, congratulations, your project was also one of two in Scotland to win an RIBA National Award. And yours was one of 26 in the country, and one of, you know, a half dozen or so kind of housing projects. I mean, I think, you know, if there were some lessons learned and some kind of almost manifesto points for, you know, kind of social housing projects to be taken forward, and lessons learned from, you know, how well received your project's been, what do you think they would be?
I really believe in the quality of light, I think, in cities. And I believe that I've never liked the idea that, you know, social housing needs to look a certain way and private housing this way. And, you know, I want all housing to be great no matter what I'm doing. I'm working on multiple different projects for different clients, and they all should be good. We should be looking at it from that perspective. The other thing that, and just looking at the announcements of what Labour are looking at doing in terms of development, we do have a lot of brownfield sites. Glasgow's got a number of, I currently live in Leeds, work for Page Park in the Leeds office, and Leeds has lots as well. And there's loads of opportunities to densify our cities, increase public transport, and that's really where we can get the growth. We don't necessarily need to be looking at greenfield. It's all there in the cities, and that's really where we'll drive economic growth as well, because you can see that statistically. It just seems like a no-brainer. So, and interestingly, the recent National Planning Framework, NPF4 for Scotland, does talk about a lot of this stuff. It's car-free or reduction of car use. It's 15, 20-minute cities. It's stuff on your doorstep. It's about light. It's about space. And it's also about identity as well. And I think all these things, architects, you know, we're in a really good position to advocate for and be part of. And I really hope that happens, because, you know, I think, you know, we do try, and the Gorbals is a great example of how we've learned and we've created something that is resilient, and the people of the Gorbals love living there.
I think, thank you very much for that. And I think that's a really good moment to kind of end this session on. So yeah, thank you very much, James, for talking about this, and congratulations on the awards, and also personally on the RIAS Project Architect of the Year award, which you won for your kind of involvement and commitment to the scheme. And by way of announcements, I think next Wednesday, one of the other winners, RDoC by Moxon Architects, will be talking about their scheme, and that will be chaired by Katrina Hill, who was also one of my co-judges on the scheme. So so I think we're almost at 1 o'clock, and so yeah, thank you very much for joining, and I hope that was informative and educational, and I hope you all have a nice lunch. Okay, all right,
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Thank you, everybody. Cheers.
Yeah,
Take care.
thank you.
Bye now.